Your very popular book, Doughnut Economics, highlighted the outer core, or the outer ring, which is the planetary boundaries that we don't want to exceed. And then the inner ring was the human needs for well being, the things that we don't want to go below.
Mm.
And in it, talking about visuals and orthodox economics, you outlined a list of old economic thinking, like 20th century, and new 21st century economics. And maybe you could either visually, or we could put up one of your graphics, just give a kind of a brief summary of I think you had 7 points.
Yeah. So first of all, let me say that it was really important to me. What I was aiming to do in that book was to set out ways of thinking, right? It's principles of thinking that will then be adapted over time between different countries, that will be relevant differently in Malawi or Sweden, but also that'll change over time as suddenly AI appears or as crises hit. So I wasn't trying to say these are the policies that we should implement, but rather what are some of the ways of thinking that will equip us to go well? And I'm sure there's many more, but yeah, here's 7. And I'm just for the fun of it with you, I'm going to see if I can show them quickly visually. This is going to be kind of like a donut economics circus big tent. So let's see if I can do this. So 7 ways to think. The first one, change the goal. The goal of 20th century economics was endless growth, right? There we go. Endless growth curve. It was just implicitly underlying everything that we said we were aiming for, success of the economy. No, that is not a sufficient statement of what success looks like. And we know that endless growth actually takes us into a lot of problems. So we need, here we go, the donut that you just described, a goal that says leave no one falling short in the whole, but don't overshoot Earth's limits. Get everybody over the social foundation inside the ecological ceiling. We want to meet the needs of all people within the means of the living planet. It's a goal that brings together human rights and ecological integrity. And I say, okay, that's the starting point on day one. Bang, this is where we begin. What kind of economic system will actually take us there? So, number 1, change the goal. 2, see the big picture, right? If that's the compass, what's the map? The map of economics. All mainstream economics courses start with this little diagram, supply and demand. Now, that's a big act. To put supply and demand on the screen on day 1, it means we put the market at the center of our vision. It means we make price the metric of concern, and everything else that falls outside the price contract gets called an externality. That's a big framing choice of the death of the living world. Oh, it's an environmental externality. That is not nearly a big enough picture. There are no externalities, as Herman Daly and others would say. Your model's just not big enough. So I drew a diagram. Here's my embedded economy diagram. Here you go. Let's see if we can show this. So this brings together ecological economics. It brings together complexity. It brings together feminist economics and commons thinking. The economy is embedded in society, is embedded in the living world. It is a subsystem and utterly dependent upon it. But also the economy is made up not just of the market and the state, that very 20th century boxing match, the household, the space of unpaid caring work, typically done by women, and the commons and the Ostrom space where we co-create goods and services with value. If we start with this big picture of the economy and recognize that all economic activity has to operate within the planetary boundaries, and we can use these different forms of provisioning, to me, this is just so much a richer starting point for all macroeconomic modeling. So, number 2, change, get the big picture. Number 3, nurture human nature. Who is humanity? How do we tell ourselves the story of who we are in this picture? The portrait of humanity in 20th century economics, this guy, here we are, he's framed. This is a rational economic man. I decided to draw him to make him visible. He would be a man, standing alone, no dependents. He's got money in his hand. He's got ego in his heart. He's got a calculator in his head. And he'd have nature at his feet. He hates work. He loves luxury. He knows the price of everything. The real problem with this depiction is that the more the students told, oh yes, this model is a sufficient model of us, actually, we start to mimic him. Students say over time they more value competition and self-interest over altruism and collaboration because they start to mimic the model. So who we tell ourselves we are shapes who we become. Instead of this rational economic man, we need to recognize we are first the most social of all mammals. We are social, or we are adaptable. We are heuristic. We care about others' opinions. We follow the crowd. We are learning. So we have to start with the reality of humanity, which we learn from cognitive behavior psychology, from sociology, a much richer picture of humanity. Number 4, we've got to get savvy with systems. So instead of assuming the economy is in equilibrium, like that supply and demand curve showed us, recognize that it's almost probably never going to be there. It's a complex adaptive system. For this, my favorite shaped little donut springs into a complex adaptive system of interlinked dynamics, reinforcing feedback, balancing feedback, tipping points, delay, resilience, redundancy. That's the world of Donella Meadows. So think of it as a complex adaptive system that will ever be evolving. We can't control it. There's no levers to pull. The best we can hope for is to steward that system. So how do we want to steward that system? We want to steward it away from being deeply divisive. We've inherited a divisive economy that captures value and opportunity in the hands of a few. Here's the rise of the 1%. We need to steward that system into a much more distributive economy. There we go. A system that shares value and opportunity with all who co-create it. How can we make a distributive economy? So from divisive to distributive. Second big dynamic that we can steward in this complex adaptive system is from linear and degenerative. Stick it in the pipe of production, make stuff, throw it away. That's what pushes us over planetary boundaries, into a circular or cyclical regenerative economy where we use resources again and again, far more collectively, carefully, creatively, and slowly. So from degenerative to regenerative, from divisive to distributive. And then this takes us to the 7th principle, that what is the future of economic growth? What does the future look like? And I'm kind of coming back to where we began. The presumption was economies would just keep growing forever. This says, well, maybe actually we need to be agnostic about growth, because what we really want are regenerative economies and distributive economies. And there might come some point, indeed, they probably have already come to it, especially in high income economies, where they need to grow up, right? Nothing in nature succeeds by growing forever. It goes through a growth phase, and then it grows up and matures. What would it mean to create economies that actually mature? Because if we don't do that, we're going to get that. We're going to induce collapse, which is something very close to your heart and focus and thoughts, right? So how can we not break? How can we bend? How can we bend this system so that it actually matures and grows up? So those are the 7 ways to think. And let me just say again, that's just 7. Those are the ones that became really clear and obvious to me. I bet there's more. And I offer people to keep adding to them.
Bravo.
That was fun.
I might have to make this entire interview a best of clip. That was very impressive. Thank you so much for your work.